blood stained untouched snow beneath a howling blizzard. Coughing violently, a towering stranger collapsed against a frail wooden door. Inside, Rosalind hesitated, clutching her heavy iron poker. Opening that timber meant inviting danger, yet denying him meant certain death. She never suspected she was harboring her realm's most terrifying ruler. Deep within the archives of Greystone Valley, local parish records from the winter of 1422 detail a storm so fierce it froze the livestock of wealthy merchants and poor farmers alike. Rosalind Hemlock lived on the absolute fringe of this society. Banished to a drafty cabin on the edge of the Whispering Woods, she survived as an apothecary, trading salves and tinctures to villagers who despised her independence but desperately needed her remedies. Just 2 days prior, Rosalind had bartered a jar of elderberry syrup to a local tanner, Bartholomew Higgins, in exchange for a half-cord of dry firewood. It was that very wood currently crackling in her hearth, casting flickering orange shadows across the bundles of dried herbs hanging from her rafters. The wind shrieked against the shutters, a sound like a dying animal. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, easily mistaken for a branch striking the roof, but it came again 3 slow, deliberate thuds. Rosalind froze, her hands pausing over the mortar and pestle where she was grinding dried foxglove. No one ventured into the Whispering Woods after dusk, let alone during a deadly squall. Rumors of rogue wolves and brutal highwaymen kept even the bravest royal guards close to their hearths. She grabbed the heavy iron fire poker, her knuckles turning white, and crept toward the heavy oak door. "Who is out there?" she called out, her voice barely carrying over the wind. A heavy thud shook the door, as if whoever stood outside had collapsed against it. Rosalind unlatched the heavy iron bolt and pulled the door open a crack. The wind immediately blasted into the room, extinguishing 2 of her tallow candles. A man fell forward, landing face first onto her braided rag rug. He was enormous, clad in shredded leather armor and a heavy, snow-caked wool cloak. His dark hair was matted with ice and something far darker and stickier. Rosalind stood over him, poker raised, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man rolled onto his side with an agonizing groan. He looked up at her, his striking, silver-gray eyes clouded with fever and pain. His skin was deathly pale, a stark contrast to the thick, dark stubble lining his sharp jaw. "I'm ill," he rasped, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I can't walk. May I stay one night?" Rosalind's survival instinct screamed at her to push him back into the snow. Men of his size, wearing armor of that quality, were either knights of the corrupt local lord or dangerous mercenaries. Yet, as she looked at the pooling blood on her rug and the violent shivering racking his massive frame, her healer's oath outweighed her fear. "Help me get the door closed," she ordered, dropping the poker. The stranger could barely offer assistance. It took all of Rosalind's strength to drag him fully inside and slam the door shut against the howling tempest. She knelt beside him, working quickly to unfasten the frozen clasps of his cloak. "What is your name?" she asked, pulling the heavy fabric away. "Arthur," he breathed out, his eyes fluttering shut. "Just Arthur." Beneath the cloak, the source of his agony became horrifyingly clear. A jagged, ugly laceration tore across his left side, just below his ribs. But it wasn't a standard sword wound. The edges of the flesh were blackened, weeping a strange, foul-smelling dark fluid. Rosalind leaned closer, her trained nose catching the sharp, unmistakable scent of monkshood wolfsbane. Wolfsbane. A chill that had nothing less to do with the winter draft settled in her bones. Wolfsbane was a highly regulated poison, used exclusively by the King's Royal Hunt to track and execute lycans, the shape-shifting beasts that ruled the northern territories. If this man had been poisoned with wolfsbane, he was either a lycan himself or a casualty caught in the crossfire of a werewolf hunt. "Arthur," she said sharply, tapping his cheek to keep him conscious. "Who did this to you?" "Bandits," he muttered, his jaw clenching as a spasm of pain rocked him. "Ambush. On the King's Road." It was a lie. Bandits did not coat their blades in an expensive, rare botanical poison. But as Rosalind looked at the sweat beading on his forehead, she knew interrogating him could wait. If she did not draw the poison out immediately, he would be dead before morning. She hauled him toward the low cot in the corner of her cabin. He was dead weight, his muscles dense and heavy. Once she managed to get him onto the mattress, she tore his linen tunic away to expose the wound. For the next 4 hours, Rosalind fought for the stranger's life. She boiled water, steeped yarrow and charcoal to draw out the toxins, and stitched the jagged flesh with a curved needle and silk thread. The man named Arthur barely made a sound, though the muscles in his arms bunched and strained with every pull of the needle. As dawn broke, casting a pale, gray light through the frost-covered windows, his fever finally broke. Rosalind collapsed into a wooden rocking chair beside the cot, wiping a streak of blood from her forehead. She studied him as he slept. There was a rugged, dangerous aristocracy to his features. His hands were calloused, the hands of a warrior, but there were fine, faded scars across his knuckles that spoke of countless, brutal brawls. Who was this man? And why had someone gone through the immense expense of acquiring wolfsbane to kill him? By noon, the blizzard had reduced to a heavy, silent snowfall. Rosalind stood by the hearth, stirring a pot of thin oat porridge, when a low groan drew her attention. Arthur was awake. He was attempting to push himself up on his elbows, a grimace of profound pain twisting his face. "Lie back down," Rosalind commanded, crossing the room with a wooden bowl. "You nearly bled to death on my floor. You aren't going anywhere today." He looked at her, those piercing silver eyes assessing her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You saved me," he said, his voice stronger than the night before, though still rough. "I saved myself the trouble of digging a grave in frozen soil," she replied briskly, handing him the bowl. "Eat. It will help replenish your strength." He took the bowl, his large fingers brushing against hers. His skin was abnormally warm. "You recognize the poison on the blade," he stated, rather than asked. Rosalind stiffened. "I am an apothecary. I recognize many things. Wolfsbane is not typically carried by common highwaymen. They were well-funded highwaymen," he replied smoothly, taking a bite of the porridge. He didn't break eye contact. "I owe you my life." "Lady, Rosalind, just Rosalind. And you owe me nothing but a quiet departure once you can walk." Despite her harsh words, a strange domesticity settled over the cabin for the next 2 days. Arthur was an unusual guest. He was incredibly observant, watching her measure herbs and read through her dusty, leather-bound medical journals. He asked intelligent, probing questions about her life on the fringe, about the local politics of the village, and, most alarmingly, about the Alpha King of the Silvermane Pack, the ruthless Lycan ruler who held dominion over the lands just 30 leagues north. "They say the Wolf King is a monster," Arthur remarked on the 3rd evening, sitting by the fire as Rosalind mended a torn apron. "They say he slaughters humans for sport." "People say many things," Rosalind replied, threading her needle. "Most of the villagers in Oakhaven are terrified of their own shadows. I've heard the Alpha King, Gideon, is brutal, yes, but I also hear he provides safe passage through the northern trade routes for those who pay the toll. That is more than our own Lord Alistair can say." Arthur's eyebrows raised a fraction. "You defend a beast?" "I defend logic," she corrected him. "Monsters do not build thriving trade economies. Only calculated rulers do." A slow, complex smile spread across Arthur's face. It transformed him, wiping away the exhaustion and revealing a breathtakingly handsome man. "You are a very rare woman, Rosalind." The following morning, necessity forced Rosalind to venture into Oakhaven. She was dangerously low on salt and flour. Leaving Arthur resting by the fire, she strapped on her snowshoes and made the grueling 2-mile trek into the village. The atmosphere in Oakhaven was tense. Armed soldiers wearing the crimson and gold crest of Lord Alistair patrolled the muddy streets. Rosalind kept her head down, making her way to the baker. Inside the warm, yeast-scented shop, Sarah Jenkins, a stout woman with flour on her nose, leaned over the counter. "Have you heard the news, Rose?" Sarah whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "Lord Alistair has doubled the guard." "Why? More bandit raids?" Rosalind asked, trading 2 copper pennies for a heavy loaf of rye. "Bandits?" Sarah scoffed quietly. "No. The King's huntsmen passed through yesterday. They claim the Alpha King of the Silvermane Pack was assassinated in a coup. Others say he survived but is gravely wounded, fleeing through our territory." Lord Alistair has offered a bounty of 500 gold pieces for the Wolf King's head. Rosalind's blood ran ice cold. A massive man, wounded by wolfsbane, fleeing through the territory. Did the huntsman provide a description? Rosalind forced herself to ask, her voice remarkably steady. A giant of a man, Sarah replied, shuddering. Dark hair, eyes the color of polished steel. They say if you look into them, the beast will compel you to do his bidding. Rosalind practically ran the 2 miles back to her cabin. Her mind raced with terrifying realizations. She was harboring a werewolf. Not just a werewolf, the Alpha King. If Lord Alistair's men found him in her home, she would be burned at the stake for treason and witchcraft. She burst through the door of her cabin, out of breath, snow swirling in behind her. Arthur Gideon was standing by the hearth. He had found a clean linen shirt she kept belonging to her late father, and it stretched tightly across his broad shoulders. He turned to her, his posture no longer that of a frail, wounded traveler, but a predator who had just caught a scent. "You're back early," he noted, his voice dangerously calm. Before Rosalind could confront him, the sound of heavy hoofbeats thundered into the clearing outside her cabin. Shouts rang out. "Surround the perimeter! Check the shed!" Rosalind peered through the frosty window. Half a dozen of Lord Alistair's armored guards, led by the ruthless Captain Roderick, were dismounting in her front yard. She spun around to face the man she now knew was the Alpha King. Gideon's silver eyes flared with a sudden, unnatural amber light. A low, terrifying growl rumbled deep within his chest, a sound that vibrated the very floorboards beneath her feet. "They followed your tracks from the village," Gideon stated, stepping toward her, moving with a lethal, fluid grace that betrayed no hint of his recent near-death experience. "Hide," Rosalind hissed, grabbing his arm. The muscle beneath the shirt was like warm iron, under the floorboards in the pantry. "Now, I do not hide from human sheep," Gideon sneered, his canines subtly elongating. "If you shift here, they will kill you, and then they will kill me." Rosalind shoved him toward the back of the cabin. "You owe me your life! Repay it by getting in the damn hole!" Gideon paused, looking down at her fierce, desperate expression. The amber faded from his eyes, replaced by a glint of profound respect. Without another word, he slipped into the small pantry and lowered himself into the root cellar, pulling the false floorboards shut just as a heavy fist began pounding on her front door. "Open up in the name of Lord Alistair," Captain Roderick bellowed. Rosalind took a deep, trembling breath, smoothing her skirts and wiping the panic from her face. She walked to the door and pulled it open, staring down the armed men who had come to hunt a king. Captain Roderick did not wait for an invitation. He shoved past Rosalind, his chainmail clinking harshly against his breastplate, and stepped into the small, herb-scented cabin. 4 guards filed in behind him, their hands resting menacingly on the pommels of their broadswords. "Captain," Rosalind said, keeping her voice entirely devoid of the sheer terror coursing through her veins. "To what do I owe this intrusion? I paid my quarterly copper tax to Lord Alistair's collector last moon." Roderick ignored her, his dark, beady eyes scanning the room. They lingered on the unmade cot, the stained bandages soaking in a wooden bucket, and finally, the dark, scrubbed patch on the braided rag rug where Gideon had bled. "We are tracking a beast," Roderick rumbled, turning to face her. "A lichen. Tall, heavily built. Witnesses in the valley reported tracks leading toward the Whispering Woods, and it seems, apothecary. You have been practicing your trade on something that bleeds heavily." He pointed a thick, gauntleted finger at the bucket. Rosalind's mind worked with the speed of a striking viper. "A hunting hound, Captain. Old man Henderson's mastiff tore its flank on a boar's tusk. I spent the morning stitching the poor creature back together." Roderick sneered, taking a step closer until Rosalind could smell the stale ale on his breath. "Is that so? Then where is the hound?" "Henderson took him home before the snow grew too deep." She lied smoothly, meeting his gaze without blinking. "If you wish to march 2 miles in this weather to verify a dog's stitches, you are welcome to do so." The captain narrowed his eyes. He paced toward the pantry. Rosalind felt her heart stop. Beneath those floorboards, the Alpha King of the Silvermane pack crouched in the dark, If Roderick possessed even a fraction of a wolf's sense of smell, they were doomed. Roderick kicked the pantry door open, knocking over a sack of dried lentils. He peered into the gloom, his hand resting inches from the false floorboard. The silence in the cabin stretched so tight it threatened to snap. Then, a guard near the window called out, "Captain!" The snow is filling in tracks heading east, toward the ravine, large strides. Roderick scowled, kicking the lentils aside. "If I find you are harboring enemies of Lord Alistair, Rosalind Hemlock, you will hang from the old oak in the square," he spat. Without another word, he signaled his men, and they stormed out, mounting their horses and galloping east. Rosalind waited until the hoofbeats faded into the howling wind before she bolted to the pantry, throwing the floorboards aside. Gideon rose from the root cellar, his massive frame unfurling. The lingering effects of the wolfsbane had left a pale sheen of sweat on his face, but his silver eyes burned with a terrifying, ancient power. "You lie with remarkable ease, little healer," Gideon murmured, stepping out of the small space. "And you are the most dangerous creature in this realm," Rosalind fired back, her fear finally giving way to fury. She shoved him, though it was like pushing a stone wall. "You are the Alpha King. You brought the King's Hunt and Lord Alistair's army to my doorstep." Gideon did not flinch. Instead, he caught her wrists, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle. "I brought betrayal to your door, Rosalind. And for that, I am sorry." She stopped struggling, caught off guard by the genuine remorse in the monster's voice. "Who poisoned you?" she whispered. "My own blood," Gideon replied, his jaw tightening. "My beta, Conrad. He struck a deal with Lord Alistair. Alistair wants the northern trade routes, and Conrad wants my throne. They ambushed me under the guise of a peace summit. Conrad's blade was coated in wolfsbane. He knew it was the only thing that could slow my healing enough to kill me." Rosalind looked up into his eyes, seeing the profound weight of a ruler who had been stabbed in the back by his closest brother-in-arms. "Why didn't you kill me when you woke up? You Lycans despise humans." Gideon released her wrists and reached up, his knuckles brushing a stray curl of dark hair from her cheek. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "Because, Rosalind, you looked at a dying man and saw a life worth saving, not a bounty to be claimed. In my world, loyalty is bought with blood. You gave yours freely. I am bound to you now." The fragile peace of the afternoon did not last. As the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Blackwood Ridge, plunging the whispering woods into deep, violet shadows, the very air inside the cabin grew heavy. The howling blizzard, which had raged for 3 days, abruptly died. In its place, an unnatural, suffocating silence settled over the snow-choked valley. Rosalind stood by the hearth, mechanically grinding dried sulfur and saltpeter in her stone mortar. Her hands trembled slightly. She was sharing her tiny, isolated home with Gideon, the Alpha King of the Silvermane, a myth made flesh, a creature whose name made grown men cross themselves in taverns. He sat heavily in the wooden armchair, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows over the corded muscles of his arms and the dark, angry lines of his healing wound. Suddenly, Gideon's head snapped up, his silver eyes dilated, the pupils swallowing the irises before igniting into a brilliant, terrifying amber. The bones in his face shifted subtly beneath the skin, his jaw broadened, and a low, guttural snarl vibrated through the timber walls, rattling the ceramic jars on Rosalind's shelves. "They are here," Gideon growled, his voice dropping a full octave, scraping against the silence like 2 massive stones grinding together. The scent of pine, iron, and rotting meat seeped beneath the door crack, overpowering the fragrant herbs hanging from the ceiling. "Conrad?" Rosalind whispered, her blood running cold. "He did not come alone," Gideon said, rising to his feet. Despite his sheer size, he moved with absolute silence. He tracked the scent of his own poison. "Bar the door, Rosalind. Get into the root cellar and do not make a sound." Before she could take a single step toward the pantry, a voice echoed from the darkness outside, smooth, aristocratic, and dripping with venom. "Gideon, come out into the cold, my king. You have bled on this poor human's floor long enough." A heavy thud sounded against the oak door, accompanied by a muffled, terrified whimper. Rosalind gasped. Peering through a crack in the frost-covered shutter, she saw 4 massive figures standing in the clearing. 3 were wolves of monstrous size, their fur bristling with malice. The 4th was a man in dark leather armor, Conrad. At his boots lay Bartholomew Higgins, the local tanner, bound and gagged, his face bruised and bloody. "I found this wretch wandering the trade road," Conrad called out, pressing the tip of a wicked, curved blade against Bartholomew's throat. He claimed he sold firewood to the apothecary who lives here. It seems our mighty Alpha, who refused to let us slaughter the human settlements along the White River, is now hiding behind one of their skirts. "Surrender the crown, Gideon, or I will paint the snow with this tanner's blood, and then I will burn this cabin to the ash." A twist of pure fury contorted Gideon's features. He looked back at Rosalind, his amber eyes burning with a tragic realization. "If I do not go out there, they will slaughter everyone in this valley, just to ensure I am dead." "You are not fully healed," Rosalind argued, her voice fierce despite her terror. "The wolfsbane is still in your veins. They will tear you apart." "I am the king," Gideon rumbled softly, a terrifying majesty rolling off him. "And a king does not let his people or his saviors die for his throne." With a roar that shattered the remaining glass in the window panes, Gideon kicked the heavy oak door off its iron hinges. It flew outward, smashing into the snowdrifts as the Alpha King launched himself into the freezing night. He did not bother shifting fully into his wolf form. The poison had robbed him of that stamina. Instead, he fought in his terrifying intermediate state, part man, part beast, armed with elongated, razor-sharp claws and unimaginable strength. He collided with the first wolf, the impact sounding like a falling oak tree. Gideon seized the massive beast by the throat, hoisting it into the air and snapping its neck with a sickening crunch. But Conrad was cunning. He knew his former Alpha's weaknesses. As Gideon hurled the dead wolf aside, Conrad signaled the remaining 2 beasts. They did not attack head-on. Instead, they circled, darting in to snap at Gideon's injured side, reopening the poisoned wound. Black blood stained the white snow. Gideon bellowed in agony, dropping to one knee as a fresh wave of wolfsbane-induced fever washed over him. Conrad stepped forward, his curved blade gleaming in the moonlight. "You made us weak, Gideon," Conrad sneered, raising the sword. "You traded our ferocity for coin and treaties. The Silvermane Pack requires a monster, not a diplomat." Inside the cabin, Rosalind watched the Alpha King fall. Her survival instinct screamed at her to flee out the back window. But as she looked at Gideon, bleeding into the snow to protect a village that despised him, something inside her snapped. She was a healer, but she knew exactly how to destroy. Operating on pure adrenaline, she snatched the heavy glass jar of mixed sulfur and saltpeter. She grabbed a fistful of highly flammable dried magnesium shavings she kept for starting stubborn damp fires, shoving them into the jar. Grabbing a lit tallow candle, she bolted through the shattered doorway. "Conrad!" Rosalind screamed into the night. The traitor paused, turning his head just as Rosalind hurled the heavy glass jar directly at his chest. The moment the glass shattered against his armor, she threw the burning candle into the cloud of volatile dust. A blinding, deafening explosion of white fire and thick, choking smoke erupted in the center of the clearing. Conrad shrieked, dropping his sword as the flash powder seared his vision and scorched his armor. The 2 remaining wolves whimpered, entirely blinded by the chemical flash, retreating into the tree line. Gideon did not waste the opening. Pushing through the agony of his torn flesh, he surged upward through the smoke. His claws fully extended, he seized Conrad by the throat, lifting the usurper off his feet. "You sought a crown, Conrad," Gideon snarled, his voice vibrating with ancient, lethal authority. "But you forgot that I earned my throne in blood." With a brutal, singular motion, Gideon ended the rebellion. Conrad's lifeless body fell heavily into the snow. Silence descended once more, broken only by the ragged breathing of the Alpha King and the distant whimpering of the fleeing wolves. Bartholomew the tanner had fainted from sheer terror. Gideon stood amidst the wreckage, bathed in moonlight and shadow, a terrifying testament to savage power. Slowly, he turned his massive frame to look at Rosalind. She stood trembling in the doorway, her hands covered in sulfur ash, expecting the beast to finally turn his wrath upon her. Instead, the fearsome Alpha King crossed the blood-stained snow and fell to one knee before her, bowing his head in absolute submission. "You saved my life twice, Rosalind Hemlock," Gideon rumbled, taking her ash-stained hand in his massive, blood-slicked fingers and pressing it to his forehead. "My pack is fractured, my enemies are many, and I have nothing to offer but my protection, my blade, and my eternal devotion. Come with me, be my queen, and I swear upon the moon that I will make this entire world bow to you." Rosalind looked down at the terrifying, beautiful ruler who had crashed into her lonely existence. She had spent her years hiding in the shadows of the Whispering Woods, treated as an outcast. Now, a king knelt at her feet, her fingers gently curled into his thick, dark hair. "Then we had best bind those wounds before you bleed out on my doorstep again, Your Majesty," she said softly, pulling him up to meet her gaze. The Whispering Woods no longer house a lonely apothecary. Rosalind now sits upon a throne of iron and oak beside Gideon, the Alpha King. Her remedies heal his warriors, while his strength shields her from a world that once cast her aside. Their union bridged the gap between man and beast, proving that sometimes the greatest mercy lies not in barring the door, but in letting the monster inside